Theodore. The name rips through the mansion like a gunshot. Dante Kang stands in the doorway, snow swirling around him, Christmas lights blinking red and green behind him in the storm. His designer suit is soaked through, his hands bloodied from shattering the frosted window glass. In his arms, cradled against his heaving chest, is a small boy in a sequined black jacket, the kind children wear for photographs, for celebrations, not for dying. Theodore's blonde hair is crusted with ice. His lips are blue-gray. His sequins catch the chandelier light, making him look like a fallen star brought in from the cold. The dinner party, politicians in tailored suits, financiers with champagne coupes, women in evening gowns, stands frozen. A crystal glass slips from someone's hand. It doesn't shatter. The thick carpet swallows the sound. Dante drops to his knees on the marble floor. The most dangerous man in Korea, the man whose name makes rival syndicates go silent, the man whose tattooed neck bears symbols of every life he's taken, that man is now begging a 7-year-old to breathe. Stay with me, Theodore. Please? The Christmas trees in the corners of the room seem obscene now, their twinkling lights mocking the stillness of the child. Red poinsettias arranged on the mantel look like blood. Behind the crowd, pressed against the cream-colored wallpaper near a decorated tree, stands Amber. She wears an elegant white gown with red feathered sleeves, too beautiful for staff, but she'd been told to look the part tonight. Her dark skin glows under the warm lighting, her expression perfectly neutral. But her hands shake around the champagne tray she's holding, because Dante's eyes have found hers, and in that moment, she knows. He knows. You, Dante whispers, his voice cracking. You were here the whole time. Amber's mouth opens. Nothing comes out. Dante rises slowly, Theodore still limp in his arms. Snow melts into puddles beneath his Italian leather shoes. His voice drops to something more terrifying than screaming. Tell me what happened to my son. The room holds its breath. Tell me who did this. 1 hour earlier. The estate was a fortress carved into the mountains, wrapped in snow and silence. No one arrived without an invitation. No one left without permission. Tonight, Dante Kang had opened his doors to the most dangerous people in Korea, and they had come willingly, because refusing Dante was not an option. Inside the mansion, warmth radiated from every surface. Crystal chandeliers caught the firelight. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The dining table stretched the length of the room, adorned with gold cutlery, winter orchids, and bottles of wine older than most of the staff. This was power on display, control made visible. But outside, the blizzard raged, the kind of storm that buried roads, erased landmarks, trapped anyone foolish enough to be caught in it. Dante moved through the room like a shadow in a tailored suit, his neck tattoos just visible above his collar, a reminder that wealth and violence were not opposites in his world. He shook hands, poured drinks, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Everything calculated. Everything controlled. His son, Theodore, was supposed to be upstairs. That's what everyone assumed. No one thought to ask, except Amber. She stood near the wall, hands folded, eyes down, trained to be invisible. She'd worked in the estate for 3 years, long enough to know when to speak and when silence was survival. Tonight, silence was a cage, because she had seen it. She had seen Theodore led outside. She had seen the doors close behind him. She had heard the lock click. And she had said nothing. Now, as the guests toasted and the violins played, Amber stared at the frost forming on the windows and prayed that someone, anyone, would notice what she was too afraid to say. The boy was still outside, and the storm was getting worse. It started 2 hours before the dinner began, when Theodore made the mistake of asking a question no child in Dante's house was supposed to ask. Why do people have to die for you to stay in charge? 3 hours earlier, Theodore stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still dressed in his black sequin jacket, the one his father had chosen for him to wear when the guests arrived. He was supposed to be upstairs, practicing piano or reading quietly in his room, but he'd heard voices, sharp voices, the kind that made the air feel dangerous. Through the crack in the service hallway, he could see them, his father's associates gathered around the prep table where staff usually chopped vegetables, maps spread across the marble counter, photographs of men Theodore didn't recognize, and words. So many words he wasn't supposed to understand, but did. Territory, elimination, necessary losses. The harbor district needs to be cleared by New Year's, one man said, jabbing a finger at the map. I don't care how it gets done. Families live there, another voice countered. Not our problem. Theodore's small hands gripped the doorframe. He thought about the harbor. He'd been there once with his nanny. There were children playing near the boats, vendors selling fish, old women sitting on benches. The words kept coming, colder, sharper. And then Theodore did something he'd been taught never to do. He spoke. Papa? The room went silent. Dante turned, his expression shifting from calculation to surprise. Theodore, you should be upstairs. I heard what they said about the harbor, about the families. One of the men, a politician with silver hair and dead eyes, smiled thinly. The boy is curious. Theodore looked up at his father. Why do people have to die so you can stay in charge? The silence that followed was suffocating. Dante's jaw tightened. The associates exchanged glances. One man, Victor, his father's oldest ally, leaned back in his chair, watching. Theodore, Dante said quietly, go to your room. But Papa, I don't understand. Now. Theodore flinched, but he didn't move. If you're in charge, can't you just not hurt people? Victor's laugh was cold. The boy doesn't understand the world he lives in. Then perhaps, another voice interjected, a woman in expensive furs, he should be taught. Dante's eyes narrowed. He's 7. Old enough to know when to be silent, Victor said. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. Dante, your son embarrassed you in front of your partners. That requires correction. I'll handle my son. Will you? Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Because from where I'm standing, the boy thinks he can question your authority. Today, it's a moral question. Tomorrow, he tells the wrong person the wrong thing. Theodore's heart pounded. He looked at his father, waiting for him to defend him. Dante said nothing. A lesson, Victor continued, is sometimes best learned through discomfort. Send him outside. Let him think about respect. 5 minutes in the cold will teach him more than 100 lectures. The storm rattled the windows. It's a blizzard, Dante said flatly. Then he'll remember it. Theodore watched his father's face, searching for protection, for refusal. Instead, Dante looked away. Take him to the East Terrace. 5 minutes. No more. And just like that, Theodore's fate was sealed. Amber saw it happen from the service hallway. She was carrying fresh linens to the guest wing when she heard the commotion. Adult voices, low and tense, followed by the soft protest of a child. She pressed herself against the wall, instinct telling her to stay invisible. Through the archway, she watched Victor grip Theodore's small shoulder, steering him toward the back corridor. The boy's sequined jacket caught the light as he stumbled forward, looking back once toward where his father had been. Dante was already gone. 5 minutes, Victor had said, but Amber had worked in this house long enough to know how quickly 5 minutes could become 10, 20, forever. She should say something. Her mouth opened. No sound came. Because 3 years ago, she'd spoken up once before, questioned why a staff member had been dismissed without notice. The head of house had smiled thinly and said, "Do you want to join her?" Amber had learned silence after that, learned to move through rooms like smoke, to hear everything and repeat nothing, to survive by becoming forgettable. But this was different. This was a child. She set down the linens and moved quietly toward the east corridor, staying far enough back that no one would notice her. Through the glass doors, she could see the terrace, stone pavement already buried under 6 inches of snow. The wind howled like something alive. Victor opened the door. Cold air rushed in, extinguishing nearby candles. "Out you go," he said pleasantly. "Think about respect." Theodore hesitated at the threshold, his small frame shaking. "Please, I'm sorry, I won't ask questions anymore." "Too late for apologies. Your father gave an order." The boy stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Then Victor turned the lock. Amber's stomach dropped. Locked? 5 minutes had become something else entirely. She watched Victor walk away, brushing snow from his sleeves, already forgetting the child he'd just condemned. The hallway emptied, the house returned to its preparations, staff arranging flowers, polishing silver, setting tables for powerful men who would drink expensive wine while a boy froze outside their door. Amber stood frozen, staring at the locked door. Tell someone, find Dante, unlock the door yourself. But her hands wouldn't move, because she knew what happened to people who acted without permission in this house. She knew the careful architecture of fear that kept everyone in line. She knew that her job, her safety, her future depended on staying silent. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The snow accumulated against the glass, obscuring her view of the terrace. She could barely make out Theodore's small shape anymore, just a dark spot against the white, getting smaller. Amber tried to approach the head butler. "Excuse me, is someone—" "Busy, not now." She tried a senior staff member. "The boy outside. Mind your station." Every attempt was shut down before it began. The dinner guests began arriving. Laughter echoed through the foyer. Champagne corks popped. Someone turned up the music. Theodore had been outside for 30 minutes now. Amber returned to the glass door, pressing her palm against it. The cold bit through the glass. Please, she thought desperately, please let someone notice. But no one was looking. No one except her. 45 minutes. Amber had counted every one of them, standing near the wall with her champagne tray, watching the guests toast and laugh while the blizzard raged outside. The Christmas lights twinkled. The fire roared. No one asked about the boy. No one except her. She'd positioned herself near the windows, hoping someone, anyone, would glance outside and notice. But the guests were too absorbed in their conversations, their deals, their performances of power. Then Dante moved. It was subtle at first. He'd been mid-conversation with a financier when his gaze drifted past the man's shoulder toward the frosted glass. He paused, head tilting slightly, as if hearing something no one else could. Amber's heart seized. "Look outside. Please look outside." Dante excused himself from the conversation and walked toward the window. Each step felt like an eternity. He raised one hand to the glass, clearing away the condensation with his palm, and froze. His entire body went rigid. "No," he whispered. Then louder. "No, no, no, no." He spun toward the crowd, his face transformed into something feral. "Where is my son?" The room fell silent. "Theodore!" Dante's voice cracked as he ran toward the east corridor, shoving past guests, overturning chairs. He reached the glass door and saw the lock. For one terrible second, he stared at it. Then his fist went through the window. Glass exploded inward, blood sprayed across the snow. Dante didn't feel it. He reached through the shattered pane, unlocking the door from the inside, and burst onto the terrace. Theodore! The guests rushed to the windows. Amber stood motionless, champagne glasses rattling on her tray. Through the broken door, she could see Dante on his knees in the snow, digging frantically. He found his son near the iron gates, a small shape barely visible beneath the white blanket of storm. Theodore wasn't moving. Dante scooped him into his arms, and even from inside, Amber could see the horror on his face. The boy's lips were gray-blue. His skin looked like porcelain. The sequin jacket that had sparkled so beautifully now seemed like a cruel joke, decoration on something lifeless. "No, no, no!" Dante's voice was raw as he stumbled back inside, snow and glass crunching beneath his feet. "Get a doctor, now!" Staff scattered. Guests backed away, faces pale with shock. Dante collapsed beside the fireplace, laying Theodore on the Persian rug. He pressed his ear to the son's chest, fingers searching desperately for a pulse. Nothing. "Breathe," Dante begged, starting compressions on the small chest. "Breathe, Theodore. Come on, son, breathe." A politician reached for his phone. Dante's head snapped up. "Put it down. No one leaves. No one calls anyone." He turned back to his son, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he whispered, his forehead touching Theodore's frozen one. "Please don't leave me. Please." A faint, rattling breath. Theodore's chest rose. Barely, but it rose. Dante's sob echoed through the mansion. Then he stood slowly, turning to face the frozen crowd, his hands still bloody from the broken glass. "Lock the doors," he said quietly. "No one leaves this house until I know who did this." The doctor arrived within minutes, one of Dante's men, always on call, always ready. He pushed through the paralyzed crowd with a medical bag, dropping to his knees beside Theodore's small body. "Severe hypothermia," he said, fingers on Theodore's neck. "Pulse is weak. We need to warm him slowly. Too fast, and his heart could stop." Dante stripped off his jacket, then his shirt, pressing his bare chest against his son's frozen body. "Use me. Take my warmth." "Mr. Kang, that's not—" "I said use me." The doctor didn't argue. He wrapped blankets around both of them, directing staff to bring warm, not hot, water, heating pads, anything that could raise Theodore's core temperature without shocking his system. The guests watched in silence as the most feared man in Korea cradled his dying son, rocking him gently, whispering things no one could hear. Amber stood against the wall, her champagne tray long abandoned. She watched Dante's face, the raw anguish there, the complete dissolution of the mask he always wore. This wasn't the mafia boss anymore. This was just a father. "Come on, Theodore," Dante murmured, rubbing his son's arms, his back, trying to push warmth back into frozen limbs. "Come back to me. Please come back." As he held his son, something shifted in his expression. His eyes went distant, seeing something else, somewhere else. He was 8 years old again, locked in a cellar in winter, his own father standing at the top of the stairs. "Weakness must be punished," his father had said. "You'll stay there until you understand." Dante had stayed there for 2 days. He'd learned to bury his fear so deep it became something else, something harder, something that didn't feel. He'd sworn he would never be like his father, and yet here he was, in a mansion full of people who feared him, holding a son who'd been punished for showing exactly the kind of sensitivity Dante had once possessed, before it was beaten out of him. He'd built the same prison, just with better furniture. "I'm sorry," Dante whispered against Theodore's hair. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have—" Theodore's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, father and son just stared at each other. Then Theodore's small voice, barely audible. Papa? Dante's chest heaved with a sob he couldn't contain. I'm here, son. You're safe now. The doctor checked Theodore's vitals, nodded slowly. He's stabilizing, but he needs to stay warm, stay still. The next hour is critical. Dante didn't let go. He sat there on the floor, wrapped around his son, while the dinner guests stood frozen and the Christmas lights blinked mindlessly in the background. Then, slowly, Dante raised his head. His eyes swept across the room, past the politicians, the financiers, the syndicate leaders, past the decorated trees and the holiday feast growing cold on the table. His voice, when it came, was perfectly calm. Someone here wanted my son dead. The room temperature seemed to drop. And before this night ends, I'm going to find out who. Theodore was carried upstairs by the doctor, wrapped in heated blankets, his breathing steady but fragile. Dante watched until his son disappeared from view, then turned back to the room. The guests hadn't moved. They stood like statues, expensive clothing and frozen expressions, waiting for permission to breathe. Sit, Dante commanded. They sat. He walked slowly around the dining table, hands clasped behind his back, blood from the shattered window still dried on his knuckles. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. My son was outside for nearly an hour, in a blizzard, locked out. He paused behind Victor's chair. Someone took him there. Someone locked the door. Someone decided that was an appropriate punishment for a 7-year-old asking a question. Silence. I want to know who. More silence. Dante's hand came down on the table. Not hard, just a tap, but everyone flinched. I'm going to ask one more time, and if no one answers, I'm going to assume everyone here is complicit. His smile was cold, which means everyone here is guilty. A politician cleared his throat. Dante, I'm sure it was just what? A misunderstanding? Dante's voice sharpened. My son nearly died under my own roof while I was 50 feet away. That doesn't happen by accident. Still, no one spoke. The staff members lined against the wall trembled. The head butler stared at his shoes. The senior housekeeper clutched her apron. And then Amber stepped forward. Every eye turned to her. She still wore the elegant white and red gown, but her hands shook as she moved away from the wall. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I know what happened. Dante's gaze locked onto her. Speak. Amber swallowed hard. 3 years of silence screaming at her to stop. 3 years of survival instincts telling her this was suicide. But she thought of Theodore's small body in the snow, of his father's anguished screams, of her own cowardice standing by while a child froze. Victor ordered it, Amber said, her voice gaining strength. 3 hours ago, Theodore asked questions during the business meeting. Victor said the boy needed to be taught respect. He told Mr. Kang to send Theodore outside. 5 minutes, he said, to teach him. The boy was disrespectful. You locked the door, Amber interrupted, something fierce breaking through her fear. I watched you. 5 minutes became 10, then 20, then 45. You locked him out there and walked away. I was following Dante's order. My order was 5 minutes, Dante said quietly. Too quietly. The boy needed to learn. My son nearly died. The room shook with Dante's rage. Amber continued, her words tumbling out now. And it wasn't just Victor. Others knew. They saw Theodore outside through the windows and said nothing. They heard the storm and didn't check. This wasn't discipline. Her voice cracked.
This was a test to see if they could use him against you. To see if they could use him against you. Dante turned slowly toward Victor. Is that true? Victor lifted his chin. Your attachment to the boy makes you weak, Dante. Everyone sees it. You simply tried to kill my son to prove a point. To prove you're vulnerable, and I was right. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dante smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Amber had ever seen. Thank you for your honesty, Victor. He turned to his guards. Take him outside.
Victor didn't move. You're making a mistake. Am I? Dante circled the table slowly, his voice calm, controlled. The voice of a man who'd already decided how this would end. Let me tell you what I think happened tonight, Victor. He stopped, placing both hands on the back of a chair. You've been questioning my leadership for months. Subtle comments, suggestions that I've gone soft, that having a son makes me weak, distracted, vulnerable. Dante's eyes swept the room. You weren't alone in thinking it, were you? Several guests shifted uncomfortably. So tonight, you orchestrated a test. Get Theodore out of the way during dinner, see if I'd even notice, see if my attention was on my empire or my child. Dante's smile was razor-sharp. And if something happened to him in the storm, well, that would solve your problem permanently, wouldn't it? That's not Amber, Dante interrupted, not taking his eyes off Victor. Tell everyone what else you saw tonight. Amber's voice shook but held. I saw Victor speaking with Councilman Park and Mr. Chen before dinner. They were laughing about something. When I passed with the champagne, I heard Victor say, by midnight, this house will have new leadership. The councilman's face went pale. Anything else? Dante asked softly. The Harbor District deal, Amber continued, pieces clicking together as she spoke. The one Theodore overheard. Victor's been pushing it for weeks, but you kept delaying, Mr. Kang. You wanted to relocate the families first, minimize casualties. Victor called that weakness. Dante nodded slowly. The deal would have made Victor very rich, very powerful, but only if I approved it. He turned back to Victor. Except I wasn't going to approve it, was I? Not the way you wanted. So you needed me compromised, broken, or replaced. You're paranoid. Your phone, Dante said, the one you've been checking all night. Give it to me. Victor's jaw tightened. Now. The guards stepped closer. Victor had no choice. He pulled the phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. Dante picked it up, scrolled briefly, then read aloud. The boy is handled. Proceed with secondary arrangements. By morning, Kang will be too unstable to lead. He looked up. Secondary arrangements, Dante repeated thoughtfully. What exactly did that mean, Victor? Were you planning to remove me tonight? Stage a coup while I was grieving my dead son? Victor stood slowly, all pretense of deference gone. You've become a liability, Dante. Sentimental. Weak. This organization needs a leader who understands that power requires sacrifice. Sacrifice? Dante's voice dropped to a whisper. You tried to sacrifice my child. To save this empire from your weakness. My son is 7 years old, and you're a criminal king who's forgotten what that means. Dante stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up a glass of wine from the table, examined it thoughtfully. You're right about one thing, Victor. He set the glass down. I had forgotten what it means to be king. He nodded to the guards. Now I remember. Take him to the gates. Victor's composure finally cracked. Dante, wait! Dante said simply, You chose the storm. Now you can have it. The guards moved swiftly, gripping Victor by both arms. He struggled, his polished veneer shattering completely. Dante, please, we can discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. Victor's voice climbed toward panic. I've served you for 15 years. 15 years of loyalty. You tried to murder my son. Dante's tone held no emotion at all. There is no loyalty that survives that. The guards dragged Victor toward the east corridor, the same path Theodore had walked hours earlier, past the shattered window, now covered with plastic sheeting that billowed in the wind, toward the door that had been locked against a child. Wait! Victor's shoes scraped against the marble. I have information, alliances, contacts, things you need to know. Dante followed at a distance, hands in his pockets. I already know everything, Victor. Amber's been watching this house for 3 years. She knows who you meet with, who you call, where your money goes. He glanced back at Amber, still standing near the wall. Turns out, the invisible people see everything. Victor's face twisted with rage and fear. That woman is nothing! A servant! That woman, Dante said quietly, just saved my empire by telling the truth, while you, my oldest ally, tried to destroy it with lies. They reached the blast door. Through it, the blizzard still raged, though less violently now. Snow piled in drifts against the iron gates, the same gates where Theodore had been found. Dante unlocked the door himself. Cold air rushed in, extinguishing nearby candles, scattering napkins from the abandoned dinner table. The sound of wind filled the mansion. Dante, for God's sake! My son is 7 years old, Dante said, his voice barely audible over the storm. He asked a moral question, and you decided he deserved to freeze to death for it. I didn't think. No, you didn't. Dante stepped aside, gesturing to the open doorway. 5 minutes. That's what you told me. 5 minutes to teach respect. Victor's eyes widened in horror. The storm, it's still... You can't. You locked a child out here for 45 minutes, in weather exactly like this. Dante's expression was carved from ice. I'm being generous. You get until the storm ends. I'll die out there. Yes, Dante said simply. You will. The guards shoved Victor through the doorway. He stumbled into the snow, falling to his knees, the same spot where Theodore had collapsed. He spun around, reaching for the door. Dante closed it and turned the lock. Victor's screams were muffled by the glass and wind. He pounded on the door, his face contorted with terror. The same terror a 7-year-old boy must have felt an hour ago. The guests who had followed to watch now stood frozen, understanding flooding their faces. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was symmetry. Dante turned away from the door, walking back toward the dining room. His voice carried clearly. Anyone else want to discuss my leadership? Silence. Anyone else think my son makes me weak? No one moved. Good. Dante stopped at the fireplace, warming his hands. The rest of you are free to leave. In the morning, when the storm clears. Behind him, Victor's screaming faded. Outside, the wind began to quiet. Dawn broke pale and cold over the mountain estate. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself sometime near 4 a.m., leaving behind a world buried in white. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the snow into fields of diamonds. Beautiful, deceptive, deadly. Dante stood at the window of Theodore's room, watching the lights spread across the landscape. Behind him, his son slept peacefully, wrapped in heated blankets, his breathing steady and strong. The doctor had stayed through the night, monitoring vitals, adjusting temperatures, ensuring the boy would survive. He would. The doctor had confirmed it an hour ago. Theodore would live. Outside, near the iron gates, a shape lay motionless in the snow. The guards had already been dispatched to remove it. Dante didn't look. He'd made his point. The guests had left at first light, silent, shaken, escorted down the mountain by armed guards. No one had spoken. No one had protested. They'd simply gathered their coats and disappeared into the winter morning like ghosts. The dinner table remained untouched, food congealed and cold, champagne flat in forgotten glasses. The Christmas decorations seemed obscene now in the morning light, festive remnants of a night that had changed everything. A soft knock at the door. "Come in," Dante said quietly. Amber entered, still wearing the white and red gown from the night before, though she'd wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "You asked to see me, Mr. Kang." "I did." Dante gestured to the chair beside Theodore's bed. "Sit, please." She sat carefully, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Dante was silent for a long moment, watching his son sleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Quieter, more human. 3 years you've worked here. 3 years you've been invisible, watching, listening, surviving. Amber said nothing. Last night you could have stayed silent, probably should have. It would have been safer. He turned to face her. "Why didn't you?" Amber met his eyes. "Because I was tired of being silent while terrible things happened around me. And because," she glanced at Theodore, "because he's just a little boy and someone had to speak for him." Dante nodded slowly. "You saved his life. If you hadn't told me who was responsible, I never would have known this was orchestrated. I would have thought it was an accident, a terrible mistake." He paused. "Victor would have tried again. I know. You risked everything." "I did." Dante walked to his desk, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to her. "Inside is a bank account number, enough money to start over anywhere you want. New identity if you need it, protection, freedom." Amber stared at the envelope, not taking it. "Why?" "Because you're the only person in this house who told me the truth when it mattered." Dante's expression softened. "And because my son is alive because of you." She took the envelope slowly, fingers trembling. "You don't work for me anymore. You don't owe me anything. But if you want to stay, if you want a different kind of life here, you'll have it. Not as staff, as someone I trust, someone who has a voice in this house." Amber looked at Theodore, then back at Dante. "I'll stay," she said quietly, "but only if things change, really change." "They already have." Dante turned back to the window, watching the sun climb higher. "Last night I learned something I should have known years ago." "What's that?" "The most dangerous enemy I ever faced wasn't outside the gates." He looked at his sleeping son. "It was the silence I allowed inside my own house." Amber stood, envelope in hand. "What happens now?" Dante was quiet for a moment, then, "Now I rebuild, without the people who thought my son was a weakness to exploit, without the alliances built on fear instead of respect." He glanced at her. "With people who tell the truth, even when it's dangerous." "That's a different kind of empire." "Yes," Dante agreed. "It is." Outside, the snow began to melt in the morning sun. The storm was over. But the silence that had nearly killed his son, would never return. Dante had made certain of that. If you're still with us and this story has grabbed hold of something inside your chest, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can keep bringing you stories that matter, stories that breathe, stories that refuse to look away. And if it isn't too much to ask, would you tell us where you're listening from? Drop a comment below and let us know which city, which corner of the world the story has reached tonight. Every comment reminds us why we do this.